Picture a clearing deep inside the Yukon boreal forest. It is midwinter, the temperature is hovering around minus 30 degrees, and the snow is 2 meters deep.
Right.
The silence is absolute, and in the middle of this frozen, pristine white landscape, you find a grim discovery. 2 elite gray wolves lying dead in the snow.
And, these are apex predators at the absolute peak of their physical condition. Like, their thick winter coats are intact, muscle definition is optimal.
Yeah.
They haven't starved to death, and they definitely aren't suffering from disease.
Right, but when you look closer, the scene stops making any logical sense. Because there are no bite marks on these wolves.
Not at all.
There are no lacerations from massive claws. Instead, the necropsy reveals this catastrophic internal trauma, massive blunt force impact that literally shattered their skeletal structure and caused, instant internal hemorrhaging.
It's just brutal.
And the tracks leading away from these bodies, they didn't belong to a rival wolf pack defending its territory. They didn't belong to a hibernating bear that woke up angry.
No. Sinking deep into the snowpack, under just a staggering amount of weight, were the distinct split-hoof imprints of an ungulate, a herbivore.
A herbivore. The smartest, most lethal predators in the northern taiga weren't taken out by a bigger carnivore. They were executed by their own prey.
It's wild.
Welcome to today's deep dive. If you are fascinated by intense survival stories, predator versus prey dynamics, and the raw mechanics of wildlife behavior, this is absolutely for you.
Yeah, we've got a great one today.
We are unpacking a single gripping source detailing a massive herbivore that is actively hunting the kings of the taiga.
And to fully grasp the magnitude of this anomaly, we need to first dissect the brutal ecology of the neighborhood he operates in. We really have to understand the thermodynamic reality of the Yukon wilderness.
Totally.
Yeah.
Because when you look at photographs of northwestern Canada, it is stunning, right? Glacial rivers, towering pines.
Oh, gorgeous.
But living in it is an entirely different story. It is an 8-month-long crucible. I mean, weeks go by without the sun even clearing the horizon.
Yeah, and in an environment that extreme, survival is entirely dictated by what biologists call the evolutionary energy budget.
Right.
Every single calorie is currency. For a predator, hunting is a massive gamble of that currency. But for a prey animal, the math is even stricter.
How so?
Well, if a prey animal decides to stand its ground and fight, it's spending vital calories it just cannot easily replace in the dead of winter.
Not to mention the risk of injury, right?
Exactly, which is the ultimate deciding factor.
Mm.
In minus 30 degrees, if a moose gets even a minor scratch from a wolf's tooth, that wound is highly susceptible to infection or frostbite.
Wow.
A slight limp means you can't forage efficiently.
Ugh.
You weaken and you die. Therefore, the evolutionary programming for a prey animal is almost universally geared toward flight.
Running away.
Yeah, running away is calorically cheaper and carries a vastly lower risk of fatal injury than engaging in combat.
Which makes perfect sense for the typical moose we see in this region, the Alces giga subspecies. Because when you look at their anatomy, they aren't built for trench warfare. They're built like a sports car, right?
Sports car, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, a sports car is built purely for outrunning trouble, not fighting it. They have these incredibly long, spindly legs.
And those legs are an engineering marvel of evasion. They function essentially like biological stilts.
Oh, to get over the snow.
Exactly.
Mm.
While a wolf pack has to bound through 2 meters of deep snow, exhausting themselves, a healthy adult moose can power step right through it.
Wow.
Their hip joints and leg length allow them to bypass the drag of the snowpack. They are literally built to outstride trouble.
Okay, so you might be wondering then how this evolutionary rule of predators hunt moose run gets broken so violently.
Yeah.
Because sometime around 2018 or 2019, near the Desadesh River, locals and rangers started finding tracks in the spring mud that defied biological parameter.
And the initial reports were just dismissed as a hoax.
Right.
Oh, yeah. The hoof span and the sheer depth of the impressions suggested an animal carrying an impossible mass. Furthermore, the distance between the strides indicated a skeletal frame much larger than the established maximums for the Alces gigas subspecies.
But eventually, researchers managed to get documented direct observations of this animal. The locals had already started calling him the Old Destroyer or the Demon of Yukon.
Which is quite the title.
It is. And the raw physical data they gathered is staggering. We are talking about an animal standing 2.5 meters tall, just at the shoulders.
Yeah, to put that in perspective for you, if you were standing next to him, the top of his shoulder blade would be higher than the ceiling of a standard residential room.
That's terrifying.
Right. And when he raises his head, factoring in the antlers, the total height exceeds 3.5 meters.
So is this just an unusually massive moose, or is there any historical precedent for a beast this size?
Well, there is one documented comparison in the region dating back to 1897, an 820-kilogram giant.
Okay, so it happens.
It does, but the raw numbers aren't the real story here. The true mystery is the splintered antlers and scars, which prove this animal isn't just large. He is actively seeking out warfare.
Which is wild. And I want to pause here and look at the anatomy our source describes. Because height alone doesn't explain how he's killing wolves, you know?
Right.
The source notes heavily hypertrophied muscles, meaning his muscle mass is abnormally enlarged. How does an animal subsisting on twigs and lichen build that kind of density?
It requires extreme phenotypic expression, possibly a form of gigantism, where the pituitary gland continuously secretes growth hormone well past the normal developmental window.
Okay, so he's basically on natural steroids.
Sort of. In a typical moose, the body caps muscle growth to conserve caloric needs. This animal's genetics seem to have bypassed that governor completely. He's forcing his body to metabolize forage into sheer density.
Which brings us to the weaponry, the antlers.
Oh, yeah.
Our source points out a crucial detail here. These antlers aren't the symmetrical, polished racks you see mounted on a wall or in a nature magazine.
No, not at all.
They span over 2 meters, but they are asymmetrical, deeply splintered and worn down. Now, bone that thick doesn't just splinter from rubbing against trees.
No, it doesn't. Antlers are composed of incredibly dense calcium and phosphorus once they shed their velvet. To splinter an antler of that circumference requires kinetic impacts that exceed the structural limits of bone.
Wow.
You have to understand the mechanics of what happens when a moose strikes something. It isn't just about the sharpness of the tines, it is about the transfer of kinetic energy.
Right, because if he rams a solid object at full speed, why doesn't his own neck just snap from the recoil?
That's the crazy part. The neck vertebrae of a mature moose are supported by a massive array of trapezius and splenius muscles. Think of his neck like a heavy-duty hydraulic shock absorber.
Okay, I can picture that.
When he lowers his head to strike, he locks those vertebrae into alignment, allowing the kinetic energy of his 2-ton body, moving at 30 kilometers an hour, to channel directly through the thickest part of the antlers into his target.
That is insane.
Yeah, and the splintering we see on his rack tells us he has repeatedly subjected his skeletal system to high-velocity collisions against targets that had significant mass of their own.
And his hide is covered in a chaotic map of scars backing up that exact theory. He is actively seeking out warfare. This isn't theoretical either.
Not at all.
The source details 2 specific, incredibly cinematic clashes that show us exactly how he utilizes this biological weaponry.
And the behavioral shift during these encounters is what fascinates biologists the most.
Let's break down the first one. It happens in early November. 2 biologists are tracking a pack of 6 wolves via radio collars in an open valley.
Right.
The wolves spot an isolated silhouette in the distance. The biologists recognize the sheer size of the target immediately. It's the Demon of Yukon. Now, wolves hunt via a highly coordinated encirclement strategy, right?
They do. They fan out to test the prey. They look for signs of weakness, waiting for the animal to panic and run.
Yeah.
The moment the prey turns its back to flee, the wolves move in to hamstring it, biting at the rear legs to cripple its mobility.
But the demon doesn't trigger that pursuit response. According to the observers, he lifted his head, pinpointed the flanking wolves, lowered those massive antlers, and just advanced.
Incredible.
He didn't do a frantic panic charge. He initiated a steady, escalating stride that the biologists literally compared to a heavy vehicle accelerating.
And this completely short-circuits the wolves' predatory programming.
How so?
Well, the wolves are waiting for the flight response to trigger their own pursuit instinct. When the prey animal suddenly becomes a targeted incoming threat, the wolves just lose their tactical advantage.
So he just runs them down. He kills 2 elite wolves with blunt force trauma. He doesn't even gore them. He essentially crushes them with hydrostatic shock, hitting them so hard their internal organs rupture.
The biomechanics of that strike are terrifying.
Yeah.
To crush a wolf's ribcage instantly, he isn't just swiping his head. He is using the forward momentum of his entire body mass, driving the antler tines downward and forward simultaneously.
And the remaining 4 wolves flee in absolute terror, and he just casually walks away.
Just walks away.
As intense as that is, the second documented event is what truly blew my mind. Fast forward to July 2024.
Oh, this one is unbelievable.
Right. A farmer and a forest ranger are in their truck searching for runaway sheep. A grizzly bear crosses the road in front of them. We're talking a 300-kilogram apex predator.
A massive animal.
And the grizzly suddenly stands up on its hind legs because it sees the massive moose approaching.
And a grizzly bear standing up is a display of ultimate territorial dominance. They have an incredibly low center of gravity and massive shoulder humps composed entirely of muscle, designed for digging and grappling.
So you would think the bear has the advantage in a physical fight. It's built to wrestle and tear.
You would think so.
But the demon doesn't hesitate. He drops his head and charges. The source says the impact was so violent the rangers could almost feel it in the air.
Wow.
The moose hits the grizzly, lifts that 300-kilogram mass of muscle, and launches it backward into the trunk of an old pine tree.
The physics required to achieve that are astounding. The moose had to drop his antlers under the bear's center of gravity.
Oh, like a forklift.
Exactly like a forklift. By using his neck muscles as a lever, he transferred all of his forward kinetic energy upward, effectively uprooting the bear.
And the rangers literally hear the bear's ribs fracturing on impact. The grizzly slumps to the base of the tree, gasping for air, completely incapacitated.
And what does the moose do?
He just watches it for a few seconds before strolling away. He knew he had broken the apex predator.
It's just a total psychological inversion.
Yeah.
The predators are stunned because their prey didn't just defend itself. It initiated the attack, forcing the supreme carnivores of the Northern Hemisphere to bow down.
Which brings us to the most crucial part of this deep dive. Why? Why is an animal biologically wired to eat plants and run from danger, actively hunting down the most dangerous carnivores on the continent?
Yeah, and the source outlines 3 distinct scientific theories attempting to explain this behavioral inversion. The first is a physiological mechanism, chronic hormonal dysfunction.
Break that down for us, because male moose do get aggressive during the mating season, right?
They do. During the rut, testosterone levels spike violently, which lowers the threshold for aggression.
Right.
However, researchers theorize that due to his gigantism, or a pituitary tumor, the demon's endocrine system is flooded with persistently high levels of testosterone year-round.
So how does that actually change his behavior when he sees a wolf?
It alters his brain chemistry, specifically by suppressing the amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain.
Okay.
When a normal prey animal smells a wolf, the amygdala triggers the release of cortisol, flooding the body with a panic response that dictates flight.
Run away.
Right. But with chronic testosterone overload, that cortisol response is blocked. Instead of fear, the sensory input of a predator instantly triggers the brain's aggression pathways. The flee protocol is basically physically erased from his neurology.
That is a fascinating mechanical explanation, but I struggle with it a bit.
Why is that?
Well, if his brain is just bathing in aggression hormones, wouldn't he be attacking literally everything? Wouldn't he be charging the biologist's trucks or picking fights with other moose constantly?
And that is the primary flaw in the purely hormonal theory. The observational data shows his extreme lethal aggression is highly specific. He targets wolves and bears.
Which perfectly sets up the second theory from our source, the trauma theory. Locals and ranchers in the area claim that when the demon was just a calf, he was cornered by a pack of wolves and he watched them tear his mother apart right in front of him.
Which forces us to look deeply into the cognitive architecture of the Cervidae family, which includes moose, elk, and white-tailed deer.
Can a moose actually process and harbor psychological trauma? Because that feels almost like we're projecting human emotions onto a wild animal.
It is very tempting to write it off as anthropomorphism, but modern neurological studies suggest otherwise. Ungulates possess highly developed associative memory, which is essential for remembering migration routes and foraging grounds.
Okay, that makes sense.
We also know their emotional cognition is roughly equivalent to a human toddler. When an animal with high associative memory experiences an extreme stress event, like a wolf attack, the brain encodes the scent, silhouette, and sound of that predator not just as a danger, but as a trigger for a massive physiological defense response.
So the trauma literally rewires his threat response. He remembers the wolves, but instead of paralyzing him with fear, that memory manifests as a violently disproportionate targeted rage.
Exactly. The memory of the trauma bypasses the flight instinct and directly activates a preemptive strike protocol. He recognizes the specific biological signature of his mother's killers, and he neutralizes them.
I find that incredibly compelling, but there is a third theory, one proposed by local veterinarians,
Right.
the protector theory.
No, the protector theory.
I love this one. The idea of a creature assuming the burden of being a demon so his offspring can live. Which of these theories actually makes the most sense from an ecological standpoint?
Well, his active, disproportionate aggression, specifically toward wolves, gives heavy credibility to the trauma or protector theories, as it implies strategy and memory rather than just blind hormonal rage. It reframes his actions from a trauma response to a highly calculated survival strategy.
Exactly. Because the theory posits that he is the guardian of a small, fragile, harem-one adult female and 2 young calves. Observers suggest these females stay hidden deep in the tree line, hundreds of meters away from wherever he chooses to stand his ground.
And let's consider the environmental pressures of the Yukon winter again. As the deep freeze sets in, traditional game becomes scarce. Predators like wolves and grizzlies become desperate, starving, and unusually bold.
And a moose calf is the easiest target in the forest. So the theory is that the demon understands this dynamic. He knows his calves radiate a scent that will eventually draw starving predators.
Right. So instead of waiting for a pack of wolves to initiate a siege on his family, he adopts a proactive defense. By actively patrolling a wide radius around his harem, he intercepts the predators before they ever catch the scent of the calves.
He assumes all the caloric risk. He takes the blunt force trauma, the scars, and the exhaustion onto himself so his genetic lineage can survive the winter.
It's a brilliant, if utterly ruthless, evolutionary tactic.
But nature doesn't allow any king, even a demonic one, to rule forever. As invincible as he seems right now, smashing bears into trees and running down wolves, the biology always collects its debts.
Sadly, yes. The physiological toll of this lifestyle is immense, and time is not on his side. Wildlife trackers estimate his current age to be between 7 and 10 years old.
For a wild moose, especially one carrying that much mass, that is the precipice of steep decline.
Oh, absolutely. His massive body is operating at its physiological limits. His immense size demands a staggering daily caloric intake.
Right.
As he ages, his molars wear down from grinding coarse winter forage. The moment he can no longer process food efficiently, his body will begin to cannibalize that hypertrophied muscle mass.
Oh, wow.
Furthermore, the sheer physical trauma of his lifestyle, the kinetic impacts against bears and wolves, has undoubtedly caused microfractures in his joints. Osteoarthritis is inevitable. His cardiovascular system, forced to pump blood through an unnaturally massive frame, will severely weaken.
It is a ticking clock.
It really is.
And it's not just his own biology that threatens him. Those asymmetrical 2-meter antlers we talked about, they make him a prime target for illegal poachers.
And that is the silent dread among the biologists monitoring the area.
Yeah.
Wildlife management regulations prohibit them from intervening. They must allow nature to take its course. But they are acutely aware that if he falls to a poacher's rifle or simply freezes to death when his teeth fail him, his unique genetics will be lost to the unforgiving Yukon winter before the next thaw.
The DNA that built a biological siege engine could vanish before science can fully decode the mechanics of his gigantism or his behavior. Once he is gone, the wolves will return. The bears will reclaim their territory. And the brief, terrifying anomaly where a herbivore ruled the taiga will end.
It serves as a stark reminder of how fragile dominance is in the natural world. There are no permanent kings in the boreal forest, only brief intervals of absolute dominance before time collects its debt.
Which leaves us with a truly fascinating takeaway. We spend our lives categorizing the natural world neatly. Predators hunt, prey run, biology dictates destiny.
Usually, yes.
But the demon of Yukon is a living monument to life's stubbornness. He is a single individual who used pure brutality to rewrite the ironclad ecological script that Mother Nature wrote for his species.
He flipped the script and forced the apex carnivores of the northern hemisphere to yield. He proves that life is infinitely more adaptable and sometimes far more brutal than our ecological textbooks suggest.
So as you go about your day, I want you to hold on to this lingering thought. If a single animal can completely shatter the ancient survival rules of the taiga through trauma or a genetic anomaly, what other unbreakable laws of nature are currently being inverted right now, deep in the wilderness, just waiting for us to find the tracks?